Hi, this is Rob Sheen with the Source Conference, and I'm here with Paul Asadoorian, who's the founder and CEO of Security Weekly, and he's going to be speaking at Source Boston on May 9th and 10th, 2018. And his talk is on how I learned not to suck at Docker security, so you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you start just by, for those that don't know what Docker is, if you could just give us like the 25,000-foot view of what Docker is to start.
Sure. So Docker's a container service which allows you to abstract your applications above the kernel level to run them on top of the operating system. Primarily, I think in support of DevOps. It's kind of interesting as I go back and read books like the Phoenix Project, and they talk about DevOps. So I was like, wow, that was before containers became really popular as a way to basically put your infrastructure and your code and applications in a neat container and be able to deploy those out to the network. So,
cool. So what's the overall talk going to be about?
Yeah, so it's really about my journey or experience. It's kind of funny, Rob, before we started recording, we were talking about, taking content and making podcasts. Several years ago, we were producing less content than today, but still enough where I wanted some type of system or tool that basically takes our high definition video file and we give it to an application, and the application automates all of those steps that myself and others working here at Security Weekly were doing manually. So we were, pushing it up to a podcast service. We were manually copying, pasting descriptions and metadata. We were then posting it to different services like YouTube and uploading to social media like Facebook, and it was just taking too long. And I said, well, my vision to grow the Security Weekly into the 7 shows we have today, we're going to have 7 times the amount of content that we have, which means we're going to have to automate. And so I tasked a developer to start the beginnings of that application. And then last year, as the software developed, I said, we kind of now are basically running a software business inside of a podcast company. And I needed to understand the DevOps process better, how software development is done today so that I could understand it and relay that information to the security community. But more importantly, understand how Docker works. I was having conversations with people, and abstractly, I'm like, yeah, I get it, but I haven't worked hands-on with it. And here presented an opportunity for myself to take our internal application and put it inside of Docker and work with it. And the talk is really about all of my experiences and kind of footnotes and side notes about what I learned and what I can caution other people about and encourage other people to do the things that I think we did right and caution them on all the things that I was like, wow, that's wrong. I got to go rebuild that and redo it again. And so that's where the talk came from.
Got it. So how does, kind of Dockerizing podcasts, how can that apply to security?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really taught me a lot about the struggles that security professionals are going to have today and do have very much so. When you're tasked with looking at any type of application security today, likely they're using Docker or some other equivalent of a containerized service to deploy that application. And so by me understanding how all this worked and looking at it with my security background going, well, that could be problematic to figure out in terms of security. I'm taking those lessons and I'm sharing them with the security community to say, if you're responsible in any way, shape, form, or fashion for helping your developers and IT department understand DevOps with this container service that they're likely using to support that process, then you're going to want to basically listen to my talk and get my perspective as to all those different things that I encountered that could be potential issues. I'd like to say that I have an answer for everything, but I don't. So it's very much a conversational, I observed this. I think this is how we could solve this problem, but if anyone has done that, share it with the group. So it'll be very much an interactive presentation as well.
Cool. So what was probably your biggest challenge with Docker as you went through? What was your biggest headache?
For me, it was really understanding how different the development process is today. From my experiences when I was the systems administrator and development would take all of the code, they would deliver it to me. I would rebuild all of the environment based on their notes and scripts and what little documentation I was provided, and then hand that off to QA. And QA would do their thing for a while and then go back to development and go back and forth until we pushed into production. When I started setting up Docker, I was like, wow, that's completely different now. And that was the biggest challenge for me, was to retrain my old archaic way of thinking into, I develop inside this container, and then once it's done, I push it to the next piece, and I can leave out a lot of that or basically all of that infrastructure work, and now it's in QA, and now I can test it, and if it passes those tests, I can push it along. It's very much the way Gene Kim and others describe even the book The Goal from 1984 that Gene references a lot. It was very much the foundation for the Phoenix Project, and how you just want to push forward. You don't want to ever go back. You just want to keep pushing forward. Grasping that concept was probably one of my biggest challenges.
So what's your favorite thing about Docker? What do you love about it?
I like the ability to basically spin up environments everywhere. And I think that was one of the things that I wanted to put inside of the talk to encourage people to use Docker. I talk to my pen tester friends, and they'd be like, well, every time we do an engagement, we spin up a bunch of tools, we create this temporary environment, and then we tear it all down. And at least last year, I'd ask all of them, well, are you using Docker for that? Because that sounds like a good job for Docker. And they're like, no, not yet. We haven't taken the plunge to go learn it. And so that's one of the other things that encouraged me to go learn it, was so that I could share my experiences and have it gain some more adoption. Because the coolest thing about Docker is you build it once inside of a container, and then you can push it around and replicate it all over the place, which I think is pretty cool.
Cool. Awesome. So you also run the Security Weekly podcast, and you've recently added some new podcasts to the lineup. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the new ones?
Sure. So Enterprise Security Weekly is hosted by John Strand and myself, and we talk about the security industry. We say we're, about the security industry, and we're not afraid to name names. So we talk about all the vendors. For me, there wasn't a lot of people that were talking about what security vendors were doing. Also, that was born out of frustration of me visiting websites, talking to the vendor, reading their white papers, and still not knowing what they did. So we created a whole podcast around it, and that's been going really well. There's Business Security Weekly, which is geared more towards senior executives in security, that talks about the security of business and the business of security. So we talk about startups, we talk about how you sell security, whether you're selling a security product or whether you're selling something to your other internal teams or management that you want to get done, a project in security, how to sell that, how to communicate. And so the theme really became communication, leadership, and innovation. And Michael Santarcangelo is the primary host for that show, and he just does a fantastic job. His background in communications, as it's applied to security, is really the heart and soul of the show. So that show's really been taking off, especially since we changed from Startup Security Weekly to Business Security Weekly. We put a slightly different spin, changed around a little bit of our content, and it's just so much fun. Let's see. Secure Digital Life is for those that are just getting started in the field. That's hosted by Doug White from Roger Williams University. Does a fantastic job of breaking things down. And then the latest one that I started with Keith Hoodlet, who works for BugCrowd, is on Application Security Weekly, talking about much of the topic of my talk and the security as it relates to DevOps, and as the security teams have to relate to development in IT as it's done today is really the subject of that show.
Got it. So lots of cool stuff going on.
Absolutely.
Cool, man. So you're kind of known for asking people funny questions on things, so I figured I'd kind of reverse your hacker movie trivia on you. So
okay.
Super. I didn't want to go into nitpicky details because I figured you'd probably crush me in any of those. So just high level, what's the best hacker movie and what's the worst hacker movie and why?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I'd say probably the best one would be Sneakers. And a lot of that is the cast that was, in that movie was just so epic. I mean, you had Robert Redford, you had Sidney Poitier, you had Ben Kingsley, and just the acting and the script, it was very, very well done. And I think still very relevant, many of the lessons that we learned from that movie today. The worst ones, man, there's a tie and a whole bunch of hacker movies that are really bad. The Net was pretty bad, and really most scenes in Hollywood movies that involve hacking are really bad. I would say Swordfish could possibly be at the top of the list for the scene that many of us know that I won't go into any details, but it is so utterly ridiculous that it may earn the top spot as the worst hacking portrayed in a film.
Right. Swordfish absolutely is my number one worst hacking movie.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the best one would be War Games still, because that was kind of the one that kind of immersed me in that initial hacker culture. And there's elements of it that were somewhat realistic, a lot of things that were not, but definitely some elements that were, related to things that were really going on at the time. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd say probably War Games and Sneakers could be pretty much a tie or flip-flop depending on my mood.
But now you pretty much maybe want to go watch Sneakers again because it's been a while.
Yes. It's a very good one. Yeah, so we've been doing hacker movie trivia at various conferences. By the time we get to Source, I'll probably have some fresh questions, some fresh trivia for people at that conference. So.
All right, cool. Well, we're looking forward to having you at Source Boston on, again, May 9th and 10th. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation with Paul, feel free to join us at Source Boston. So we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Bye.